What if the Eye of Ra was never singular but plural, not one divine feminine emanation, but 12 daughters of the sun who were each born to embody a specific aspect of solar consciousness? And what if the erasure of 11 of these daughters from Egyptian mythology was not accidental but deliberate, a systematic suppression that left only Sekhmet in the historical record, while the other 11 were buried so completely that even their names were chiseled from every monument, and their temples were filled with sand and sealed with curses meant to prevent anyone from discovering that the solar mysteries were never meant to be monopolized by male priests, but were originally channeled through women whose very existence threatened the pharaonic claim to exclusive divine authority. In the western desert of Egypt, beyond the reach of tourist routes and archaeological surveys, there exists a formation of 12 sandstone pillars arranged in a perfect circle that the Bedouin who live in the region avoid with a superstitious dread they cannot explain, speaking only of the place where the sun daughters died and of dreams that come to those who sleep within the circle. Dreams of women with eyes like molten gold who speak in a language that predates hieroglyphs and who call the dreamer to remember what the sand has covered. In the winter of 2016, a geologist named Dr. Aisha Mansour was conducting remote sensing surveys for a mining company when her satellite imagery revealed an anomaly in the desert floor near the 12 pillars, a rectangular void approximately 15 meters below the surface that suggested either a natural cave system or a human-made structure of significant size. Aisha was not an archaeologist and had no particular interest in ancient Egypt beyond the general fascination that most Egyptians felt toward their ancestors. But something about the image on her computer screen called to her with an intensity that felt less like curiosity and more like recognition, as though a part of her that had been dormant was suddenly awakening and demanding that she investigate what lay beneath the sand. She spent 6 months obtaining the permits and assembling a team, and when they finally began excavating, removing layer after layer of sand that had accumulated over millennia, she had a dream on the 7th night that would change not just her understanding of the discovery, but her understanding of her own identity and purpose. She found herself standing in the circle of 12 pillars, but instead of bare stone, each pillar was carved with the image of a woman whose body radiated spirals of golden light. And at the base of each pillar was carved a name in hieroglyphs that she could somehow read despite having never studied the language. Sekhmet she recognized, but the others were unfamiliar. Tefnut, Hathor, Bastet, Maat, Neith, Wadjet, Nephthys, Seshat, Mut, Isis, and one whose name had been deliberately defaced, leaving only the symbol of an eye within a sun disk. A voice spoke from everywhere and nowhere, a sound that seemed to come from the pillars themselves. You have been called to uncover what was buried when the priests of Ra declared that only male consciousness could channel the sun's power, when the pharaohs claimed exclusive access to divine authority, when the solar mysteries that belonged to all were monopolized by the few who understood that knowledge shared is power distributed, and power distributed is hierarchy threatened. We are the 12 eyes of Ra, the daughters through whom the sun's consciousness entered the world, and we were erased not because we failed, but because we succeeded too well, showing humanity that divinity could be accessed directly without the mediation of temples or priests, that women's bodies were natural channels for solar energy, that the feminine was not subordinate to the masculine, but its essential complement. Aisha woke with tears streaming down her face and the names of the 12 daughters burning in her mind like brands of living fire. And when her team broke through the final layer of sand and limestone 3 days later, they discovered not a tomb, but a temple, a perfectly preserved sanctuary that had been sealed during the reign of Thutmose III. The pharaoh who had systematically erased the name of Hatshepsut from monuments across Egypt in his attempt to erase the memory of a female pharaoh who had dared to claim the full authority of kingship. But this temple was older than Hatshepsut. its foundations dating to the pre-dynastic period when Egyptian society had not yet crystallized into the rigid hierarchies that would characterize the pharaonic age. The walls were covered with inscriptions and images that no Egyptologist had ever documented. Scenes that showed 12 women standing in a circle with their arms raised toward the sun, their bodies generating spirals of light that flowed outward to touch every living thing, healing the sick and nourishing the hungry and illuminating the minds of those who sought wisdom. And beneath these images was a text written in hieroglyphs that Aisha found she could read with a fluency that shocked her team, as though the dream had not just shown her the names, but had downloaded the entire language directly into her consciousness. "We are the eyes of Ra," the inscription began, chosen not by lineage or by training, but by the solar consciousness itself, marked at birth by signs that the priestesses could read in the configurations of light that surrounded each newborn child. "We were raised in temples, dedicated not to the worship of Ra as an external god, but to the cultivation of the solar awareness that lived within us, the capacity to channel the creative and healing power that the sun embodied." Each of us carried a specific aspect of solar consciousness. Sekhmet embodied the fierce protection that destroys what threatens life. Tefnut embodied the moisture that makes growth possible. Hathor embodied the joy that celebrates existence, and so on through all 12, each one necessary, each one irreplaceable, together forming the complete expression of solar wisdom. The text explained that the 12 eyes had served as a council that guided Egyptian society during the pre-dynastic period. Their decisions based not on political calculations, but on direct perception of the energetic patterns that governed health and disease, prosperity and scarcity, harmony and conflict. They did not rule through force or claim authority through divine right. They simply offered what they could perceive through their solar consciousness, and people followed their guidance because the guidance was demonstrably effective, producing results that could be verified through experience rather than requiring acceptance through faith. "But the priests who served the male gods grew jealous of our influence," the inscription continued, "and they understood that as long as the 12 eyes demonstrated that divine consciousness could be accessed directly through women without the mediation of temples or rituals, the entire apparatus of priesthood would remain secondary to direct gnosis. So they began a campaign of suppression that lasted generations, slowly transforming the solar mysteries from practices that anyone could learn into secrets that only initiated priests could access, declaring that women's bodies made them unsuitable for channeling divine power, establishing hierarchies that positioned men above women and priests above lay people. The text described how the 12 eyes had resisted this suppression, continuing to teach and to heal, continuing to demonstrate through their practice that the solar consciousness was not the exclusive property of any gender or class. But one by one they were eliminated, some through assassination disguised as accidents, others through character assassination that destroyed their reputations and made people fear seeking their help. The text identified Thutmose III as the pharaoh who had finally completed the suppression, ordering that all temples dedicated to the 12 eyes be destroyed and that their names be erased from every monument, leaving only Sekhmet in the historical record, because her association with divine wrath made her less threatening as a model for women to emulate than the other daughters who embodied healing and wisdom and creative power. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss any of our content. And tell us in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to know. "This temple was built by the last of us," the inscription concluded, "the 12th daughter, whose name was struck from the records with such thoroughness that even we who write this do not know it. For the deletion was not just from stone, but from memory itself, through rituals designed to sever the connection between name and consciousness. She was the one who embodied the complete solar gnosis, who could channel all 11 other aspects simultaneously, and she was the one most dangerous to the priesthood because she demonstrated that the solar mysteries could be fully embodied in a single individual, making temples and hierarchies completely unnecessary. She sealed herself in this chamber alive, entering into a state of suspended consciousness that the texts call the solar sleep. And she left instructions that when the time was right, when humanity had evolved to the point where the solar mysteries could be restored without immediately triggering the violent suppression that had characterized every previous attempt, she would awaken and teach again. Aisha read these words, standing before a sarcophagus that occupied the center of the temple, a stone coffin carved from a single block of red granite that seemed to pulse with subtle warmth, despite having been sealed beneath the sand for 3,000 years. Her team wanted to open it immediately, to document whatever remained of the body within, but Aisha felt a profound reluctance, a sense that opening the sarcophagus was not just an archaeological decision, but a spiritual threshold that would have consequences she could not predict. She spent the next week in meditation before the sealed coffin, sitting alone in the temple after her team returned to base camp each evening, and on the 7th night, the vision came again. The 12 women stood around her in the temple, no longer images on walls, but presences as real as her own body, and the one whose name had been erased stepped forward and looked at Aisha with eyes that blazed with the light of the sun itself. "You are the one we have been waiting for," she said, her voice resonating not in Aisha's ears, but in her bones, in the very marrow where her blood was made. "You carry the lineage not through biological descent, but through resonance, through the frequency of your own solar consciousness that has been activating through your years of working beneath the sun, absorbing its energy, aligning your rhythms with its cycles. The Eye of Ra is not exclusive to those who were born in ancient Egypt. It is available to any who develop the capacity to channel solar awareness, and you have been developing this capacity without knowing what you were doing, preparing yourself to receive the transmission that we sealed in this temple against the day when it could safely be released." Aisha felt fear and exhilaration warring in her chest, her scientific training insisting that this was hallucination or dream, while her deeper knowing recognized that she was experiencing something that transcended the categories her education had taught her to trust. "What happens if I open the sarcophagus?" she asked. "The 12th daughter will awaken," the nameless one replied, "not in the body that entered the solar sleep, for that body has long since returned to the elements, but in you, through you, as you, if you are willing to serve as the vessel through which her consciousness can return to the world. This is not possession. This is not erasure of who you are. This is integration, the joining of her accumulated wisdom with your contemporary knowledge, the fusion of ancient gnosis with modern understanding that will allow the solar mysteries to be taught in forms that can meet the needs of this age." Aisha understood that she was being offered a choice, and that the choice would determine not just her own path, but potentially the path of all women who carried the potential for solar consciousness. She could refuse, could seal the temple again and walk away, returning to her career as a geologist and leaving the 12 eyes buried in the sand where they had rested for 3 millennia. Or she could accept, could open herself to the integration that was being offered, knowing that doing so would transform her identity in ways she could not predict and would require her to serve a purpose larger than any personal ambition. She chose to accept, and the moment she made that choice, she felt something shift in the very fabric of her being, as though a door that had been locked since birth suddenly opened, and energies that had been dormant began to flow. She approached the sarcophagus and placed her hands on the stone lid, and without any physical effort on her part, the lid slid aside as though pushed by invisible hands, revealing not a mummified body, but a chamber filled with golden light so intense that she had to close her eyes against its brilliance. When she opened her eyes again, the light had subsided to a tolerable level, and she saw that the sarcophagus contained not human remains, but a crystalline structure that resembled a human form, a body made entirely of some substance that captured and refracted sunlight in ways that created the illusion of movement, of breath, of consciousness dwelling within mineral rather than flesh. And as she looked at this impossible form, she felt the knowledge that had been sealed within it, flowing into her own consciousness. Teachings about how to channel solar energy for healing and creation, how to perceive the energetic patterns that governed health and disease, how to work with the 12 aspects of solar consciousness that the original eyes had embodied. She spent the next year studying what the integration had given her, practicing the techniques that arose spontaneously in her awareness, and gradually discovering that she had capacities she had never possessed before. She could perceive illness before it manifested physically, seeing disruptions in the energy field that surrounded each person. She could channel solar energy through her hands for healing, accelerating recovery from injuries and diseases. She could speak with an authority that came not from ego, but from direct knowing, and people responded to that authority without needing proof or argument because they could feel the truth of what she said, resonating in their own depths. And she began to teach, gathering women who felt called to explore their own capacity for solar consciousness, passing on the practices that had been preserved in the sealed temple, helping them activate the Eye of Ra that lived dormant in every feminine being. Some of them experienced dramatic awakenings, abilities emerging that seemed miraculous, but that were simply natural expressions of consciousness aligned with solar frequencies. Others experienced subtler shifts, a growing sense of purpose and power, a deepening connection to their own inner authority. In her final years, as her body aged but her consciousness grew ever more luminous, Aisha returned to the temple one last time, and she added her own inscription to the walls, documenting how the 12th daughter had awakened not in physical form, but through integration with a woman of the modern age, how the solar lineage that had been declared forbidden had found a way to continue, despite all attempts to suppress it, how the Eye of Ra could never truly be erased because it lived not in stone or text, but in the consciousness of the sun itself, calling to those who could hear across the barriers of time and culture and the suppressions of patriarchy. The 12 eyes are returning, Aisha wrote, not as 12 separate women, but as 12 aspects available to all women who choose to cultivate solar consciousness, who refuse the subordination that patriarchy declared natural, who claim the authority that comes from direct gnosis rather than from institutional validation. The forbidden lineage was never broken, only hidden, preserved in the consciousness of the sun that shines equally on all, waiting for those whose inner eye could perceive what physical eyes cannot see, whose inner ear could hear what the suppressions tried to silence, whose bodies could channel what the priests declared impossible. We are the daughters returning, the eyes opening, the solar mysteries emerging from the sand where they were buried, and we invite all who feel the call to join us in the work of restoration, not of the past, but of the future, not of what was, but of what can be, when the feminine solar wisdom is finally honored as the essential complement to masculine solar power, when the 12 become one, and the one becomes many, when every woman who carries the potential remembers that she too is an Eye of Ra, seeing with the clarity that only solar consciousness provides, healing with the power that only solar energy channels, teaching with the authority that only direct gnosis grants. And if you like this story, you will definitely love the next one that's appearing on your screen. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, leave your like, and activate the notifications. See you in the next one.